This will be Chapter 7, page 2. Now, in page 1, we looked at a couple of common names for compounds, but most of the time we don't use the common names, we use the IUPAC names. So let's go ahead and go over the IUPAC methods. There's an old and a new way of doing it. The old way of doing it is taking the alkane name, dropping the ANE, and changing it to ENE. And then just putting the number here for the first carbon of the double bond. So we're going to write out a couple of these with both the old and the new way just so you can see them. All right. The new way of doing it is just taking where the number is and putting it in the middle of it right before the ENE, indicating that it's a double bond. So take the alkane name, drop ANE, add ENE, and then either put the number in front for the old way or put the number right before the ENE for the new way. Let's go ahead and see how this works. Now, for the first one, you don't need a number for it because there's only one way for this to go. So, what we have is 2 carbons would be ethane, but because there's a double bond in there, ETH, instead of ANE, it's ENE. And I don't have to put a number for the double bond because it's got to start on the first carbon because that's the way it has to be. By the way, you find the longest carbon chain and you number it from the side closest to the double bond. No matter where the substituents are, when you're naming alkenes, that's how we do it. So here, my longest carbon chain, of course, is 3 carbons, and I would number it from the end closest to the double bond. So this is going to be, and we'll do the old and the new way. The old way would be 1 hyphen, and propane would be 3 carbons if there was no double bond. Propene is if there is a double bond in there. So we drop the ANE and add the ENE. The new way of doing it is saying prop hyphen 1 ene. The new way is because if you have multiple groups in there, you're putting your number right before what that group is. That way, if you have alcohols and double bonds, you know exactly the number for the alcohol is right before the alcohol, the number for the double bond is right before the double bond. Anyway, though, let's go to this last example right here. 5 carbons, you number it from the end closest to the double bond. So instead of a pentane, it would be a pentene, and again, old way of doing it is 2 pentene. The new way of doing it is pent 2 ene. And again, you always number it from the end closest. Now, if there are substituents, let's go ahead and shrink this and get it in there. If there are substituents, you're going to number them normally. So, we find the end closest to the double bond. It doesn't matter whether we start at this carbon here or that carbon there because it's equal length. Again, you find the longest carbon chain that contains the double bond and you number it from the end closest to the double bond. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The old way of doing it, and again, this is where you start having substituents in there, so it starts to get a little bit crazy, but you name the groups. So I'm going to name the methyl group first. So it's going to be 2-methyl. And then the double bond starts, the first carbon of the double bond is carbon number 2. So that's going to be 2-pentene. The new way of doing it is 2-methyl. Sorry about that. Pent 2 ene. So it's basically what we've already done for nomenclature, only now if you have a double bond, you always name it from the end closest to the double bond. You find the longest chain with the double bond in there. And then if you're doing it the new way, you just put the number for the double bond right in front of ene, which indicates that you have a double bond and it's not an alkane. If there's more than one double bond in the molecule, then we say it's an alkadiene or an alkatriene or an alkatetraene. This one's going to be an alkane diene. But what type of alkane? Well, again, find the longest carbon chain that contains the double bonds, and I number it from the end closest to the double bonds. So that's going to be carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though there's a substituent closer on the other side, I number it from the end closest to the double bond. So this is going to be a pentadiene. And the dienes, the alkenes, will be on carbons, starting on carbons 1 and 3. Okay? So there's a methyl group in there, so I will say 4-methyl, penta, 1, 3, diene. And that's not so bad. Now, one of the other things about naming compounds is sometimes we have cis and trans molecules in there, so we want to name how the molecule is organized or arranged. But on some molecules, it's not as easy as cis and trans. So we have another way of doing it called the EZ nomenclature method. So let's go ahead and go over that. So if I take a look at this double bond right here, I'm going to say that carbon there I'll highlight in green and the other one over here in blue. So I take a look at the 2 carbons of my double bond. And I say, for example, on the green molecule over here, okay, or on the green carbon over here, I have a hydrogen and a methyl group. Remember how we did our priorities back in the stereochemistry chapter? What's a higher priority? A hydrogen or a methyl? Well, a methyl is. So I say find the highest priority group on that carbon of the double bond, and then I find the highest priority group on the other carbon of the double bond. They are opposite each other. All right? E stands for opposite, so this would be an E configuration for that double bond. Now you're saying, well, why can't we just call it trans? Well, in some cases, and we'll see this on the next page, it's not as easy as saying cis or trans. But let's go ahead and just make sure that we know how to do this. So let's go back here, highlight out the 2 carbons of the double bond. I'll do them in 2 different colors. On the green carbon, the methyl is the highest priority group, and on the blue carbon, this methyl is the highest priority group. They're on the same side of the double bond. That's the Z. Now the E and the Z come from German words, and I'm going to probably mispronounce these, but it's entgegen for opposite and zusammen for the same. So that's where the E and the Z come from. All right.